So the Nature Nanaimo mission statement is to foster an interest, appreciation, and enjoyment of nature and promote the conservation of healthy natural ecosystems in the Nanaimo region. Just try something else here. Okay. And so if you're looking for information about Nature Nanaimo, we have a website, we're on Instagram, Facebook, we have an email address that's easy to remember, naturenanaimo@gmail.com, and we're on Twitter. One of our important projects is being involved with the management of Buttertubs Marsh. And so this summer, we're offering free tours of Buttertubs Marsh. So you can get to learn about the insects, the aquatic life, the water plants, the birds, the painted turtles, and all kinds of other creatures that are there. And these tours are through the City Parks Department. So if you go to the City Parks program that you get in the mail or go to their website, you can register for these free tours of Buttertubs Marsh. And they're basically Saturday 1 week, Sunday the next week. And they started May the 6th and they go to the end of August. And then we have upcoming events for Nature Nanaimo. This Saturday, the 20th, we have a Harewood Plains wildflower ramble. On the 29th, we're going to be visiting the VIU bird banding site. I believe you have to pre-register for that because only a limited number of people can be accommodated. During the period of April through June, we're working on Western painted turtle breeding, protection, and training. And from May to August, we'll be continuing the tours at Buttertubs. There will be an intertidal ramble, Yellow Point Ecological Reserve tour of the Gary Oak Meadows at Duncan. In June, we always have a summer picnic, and we'll probably be going to see the Vancouver Island marmots and Paradise Meadows. If you're not a member of Nature Nanaimo, there's membership forms on the table by the door. Yes? Is Harewood Plains the same as Harewood Meadow? We mostly call it Harewood Plains, yes. Okay. Yeah, but it's the same place. So now we'll move on to our panel discussion. Our panel consists of 4 speakers, and we'll give each of them about 15 minutes, and they'll have to come and sit here in the hot seat. And so I think it would be easiest if we have questions for each speaker as they finish their presentation. So we'll give them 5 minutes or so for questions. People who are on Zoom can put their questions in the chat. And Alan, who's over here, is keeping an eye on the Zoom and will pass the questions on. And of course, one of the most important things in this kind of situation is that the speaker repeat the question, whether it came from here on the floor or from Zoom. And we have Lori here who has a sign to say, please repeat the question. So hopefully we can make this run smoothly. And if there's time at the end, we can have more questions and a bit of musical chairs according to who answers the questions. So our first speaker is going to be Staffan Lindgren. Staffan is an entomologist and professor emeritus at UNBC in Prince George and vice president of Nature Nanaimo. He's been a naturalist with broad interests since childhood. He is fascinated by the beauty and uniqueness of Harewood Plains and deeply concerned about the conservation of this unique place. So I'll turn it over to you, Staffan, to introduce us to Harewood Plains.
So, like I said, I'm an entomologist, so I really don't know much about plants, and they're sort of, but I recognize the importance of them. And add to that, when you go to Harewood Plains, right about this time of year, it is absolutely stunning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that very briefly. So where is Harewood Plains? the map to the left is an area that I've sort of randomly designated as being Harewood Plains, that has the kind of characteristics of Harewood Plains. Only a little tiny piece of that is protected, which is the Lotus Pinatus Park, which I think Paul's going to talk about that a little more. But you can see that it's not very much. Most of the land is actually on private land. And I'll get to that a little later. So what is it that's so special about Harewood Plains? Well, one part is that there are these meadows with very shallow soils over conglomerate bedrock, and conglomerate is just sort of a bunch of gravel that's glued together so it becomes solid. And because it's so shallow, you get, especially in spring, you get these seeps of water, so rain and so on. It results in water seeping through the vegetation and feeding these plants that are in the shallow soils. Where there's sort of depressions, you get these so-called vernal pools, and Scott is going to talk about that a little later. And they are critical for some organisms. They're just temporary pools of water. So for example, the slide in the bottom middle there is an example of vernal pool that I took just a few days ago. So these conditions are ideal for some types of herbaceous plants, and particularly these flowers that are so interesting. In terms of plants, Kent Anders, with the aid of Caroline Josephson, who's a professor at VIU, and also with the help of Linda Stevens, who's sitting back there, and Julie Devereaux, who's also sitting back there, and they're Nature Nanaimo members. So they identified 232 species. Where there's a little deeper soils, you get trees like Douglas fir and arbutus, and you also get Gary oak. And we have Wylie Thomas on Zoom. He couldn't make it up today. He's in Victoria, so he's going to talk more about the Gary oak ecosystem after I finish here. But like I said, this time of year is really the time to go up and have a look, because it's mind-blowing. There are very few places where you get that kind of colorful show. Particularly, these plants tend to dominate. We have the short spur sea blush, which is the pink one to the far left on the screen. And then we have the common camas mostly, and they provide the blues. We have the seep monkey flower, or it's also called yellow monkey flower. And they are particularly, as the seep name implies, they really like these water seeps. And the one to the far right is called spring gold. So you can imagine what that's going to be like. It's literally like pieces of gold in the plants. If you stop looking at the overall view and start looking a little closer, you find all kinds of plants. So the two left ones are orchids, spotted coral root to the far left, and one of the bog orchids in the genus Botanthera. That's Jasmine Janes at VIU is doing studies on that, with looking at pollinators of these. They're a little hard to identify because they they hybridize to some extent. And then you get spectacular plants like saxifrage. So this one in the middle is, I think it's an Alaska saxifrage, but I'm not 100% sure about that. These, the little white things to the right are called Scowler's popcorn flower. And they're tiny little things, but they're beautiful and they seem to attract insects like nobody's business. They're really valuable for that. Even smaller are the small flowered blue-eyed Mary to the far right. And in places you can actually find areas where they quite a few of them, so you get sort of a blue sheen on the ground. Nature Nanaimo has set up a project in iNaturalist. So if any of you are using iNaturalist at all, and I'm not going to explain exactly what that is, but essentially people take photographs, post it in iNaturalist, and then you get help identifying what it is you took a photo of. And I checked it out a few days ago, and there were 238 species of plant in that have been found in that bigger area. So not just the Lotus Pinnatus Park. I checked it again today and it was 242 species. So there's lots to discover up there and it's a really interesting place. This group of plants is actually what I have found or part of what I have found. And it's interesting, I didn't even know this before I looked at it, that it shows, so in the upper right corner that's an exotic plant, so it's not a native plant. And the one right below it is a native plant. So you can find out a little bit about what species are growing there and what they're doing. Native plants are extremely important. Most of our gardens, we have exotic plants. And there's been a number of studies that shows that biodiversity, so the diversity of insects, of birds, even in a small garden, benefits from having a native plant garden. So by using introduced species, we're actually negatively impacting on biodiversity. So even just when you're picking a plant for your garden, trying to make sure that it's a native plant will make a difference. So here are some examples of insects that are pollinators. And this is from Lotus Pinnatus Park a couple of years ago. A couple of butterflies, cedar hairstreak to the left, Echo Azure, that's the small blue ones that you see fluttering around a lot right now. And the far right one is a moth, ocean spray fairy moth on a Scowler's popcorn flower. And before I went in there, I'd never seen anything like that. So it was quite exciting. There are 10 red or blue listed species at least in the Harewood Plains area. And one of the special ones is, of course, the meadowbird's foot trefoil, Hossakia pinnata. It was formerly known as Lotus pinnatus, so taxonomists changed the name of it. So that's why we have Lotus Pinnatus Park and not Hossakia pinnata Park. And it is Nanaimo city flower, and it's also the logo of Nature Nanaimo. The picture to the left, I took in 15th of May, 2019 in an area that I found when I was there on the 11th of May this year. There was not a single flower there. And there are a number of threats to this area, and this is why we have this panel discussion. There's right now a development application with the city for putting in housing around Lotus Pinatus Park, actually, and Paul's going to talk about that later today, I believe. These pictures are from, or all but one are from May 11th this year. And this is the far left one is a Google Earth image of under the power line. So you can possibly see the power line to the above the road, and everything to the below there is private land. And I think most of what's seen in this picture is private land. But what's particularly interesting is you see all the tracks there. Those are made by ATVs and off-road motorbikes that are just tearing up these thin soils. And there's not going to be, it's going to take forever for them to recover, even if you can keep the bikes out of there. The middle photo, that's common camas, and I took that in 2019, as that photograph in 2019 as well. That area is largely torn up when I was there a few days ago. So things can go sideways very, very quickly. The bottom right corner, the picture shows essentially the same area as the Google Earth. Then I also found out that I believe it's Mosaic that's preparing for some kind of activity in their part of the Harewood Plains. So they had piled all this gravel. Is it BC Hydro? Okay. So things are happening and can happen very quickly, and there's not much we can do about it unless we can sort of wrestle the land away from them somehow. So anyway, that's all I'm gonna say. So I'm gonna leave it. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer that. Yes.
A red zone and yellow zone. Red zone, blue zone, red and blue.
So I'm not familiar with that. So there, you said that Planet Education?
For my own education.
Oh, for your own education.
What are those terms refer to? I think she's.
Oh,
asking-
they're red listed and blue listed. That's yeah. So what do the terms red listed and blue listed mean? And a red listed organism is threatened with extirpation, which is locally going extinct, or a blue listed is under threat. So there's something to keep track of. Yeah, someone else had a question?
Sorry, I had a question. I just put it in the chat. It's Wylie here. I was just wondering, you talked about this extended Harewood Plains.
Yes.
And how did you determine the borders of that? Oh, I put the wrong spelling there. Borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everybody heard that, I presume. Pretty randomly, to be honest. And there's another project on the iNaturalist that looks at total biodiversity. So anything, like if it's an animal, insect, fungus, whatever, it goes into that. And it follows pretty much the same outline. So they may have just used what I used. I essentially tried to look at where these meadows occurred. So where there wasn't sort of just solid forest, but we had these meadows with the characteristics that I sort of tried to describe.
It's just a general map.
Yeah, it's the map that I used for designating Harewood Plains is pretty random. And there's other areas there was in 2004, there was a study about where these rare plant and organism areas were in Nanaimo. And it's described as being essentially Harewood Plains and then out towards Duke Point, that the majority of them would be.
Okay, so when you're saying random, you just mean like they weren't,
Well, not random, but
you didn't throw darts at it or something? Like
What's that?
You didn't pin a map on the wall and then throw darts at it?
no.
It just wasn't as scientifically rigorous, but I mean, you used ortho photos and then you used data that you gleaned from iNaturalist to kind of back it up, right? What you said?
Were
You
those
know-
green dots on your map from INET?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, they
Okay.
So yeah. based
Yeah,
on
they
iNaturalist.
were locations where something had been found. So if you go into that map and you click on one of those, then you should see what the observation was. So those were the green dots on the
Okay,
left
that's what
map that I
was
showed.
wondering. Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
I'm curious, you mentioned Rainbow Canadas that you had seen in 2019. When I was out there this last week in an area that hasn't been recently disturbed, well, not where the plants grow, where I found numerous Canadas last year. I'm wondering if there's if there's no sign of them right now, and it's not in the disturbed area.
well, I hope, so the question is,
Yeah.
that the person asking said that where she found a lot of Lotus Canadas last year, when she was there this year, there's no sign of them yet. So it could be that they're just late in appearing. And I sincerely hope you're right. I would have expected to see leaves of them, even if the flowers weren't out, but I saw nothing.
I
Right.
saw one little flower just starting to pop out yesterday.
Okay,
Cool.
so Scott saw one flower just developing yesterday.
They're good 3 weeks.
And it's a very dry spring. Looking for that if you want.
Yeah, so Linda was pointing out that it's been a dry spring, relatively dry spring for this area. And that could impact on where the plants are thriving. I forgot to talk specifically about the biggest threat, maybe. So regardless of what we do to save Harewood Plains, climate change may change when these seeps occur and get out of sync with the plants. So that's yet another reason to protect this area and try to do what we can to save it.
Is that good?
There we go. Yeah.
Wow, trouble free. Holy smokes. Now, do you guys want to see my face while I talk, or I'm happy to share my face? Whoops. So yeah, I'm very sorry that I'm not there to be with you all, because I really did want to, just to meet people in Nanaimo, and also some of you on this working group I actually haven't met in person. So I did try to get onto the what's it called, the Malahat, and it was just jammed. So I turned around and came home. But I anyhow. So maybe next time. So I was just introduced, but I guess one of the things that I bring here is that I'm on the board of the Gary Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. So I've only been with them since 2020. I moved to Victoria in 2008, so I don't have a long history with the organization. And then since about 2021, I've been working with the province on stewardship at a number of Gary Oak ecosystem sites. So that's kind of what brings me to this project, to Harewood Plains. So just to outline, I'm going to go over, the background, a little bit on GERT, the Gary Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. Harewood Plains as a priority site. So it's been was chosen as a priority site many years ago. Talk about why it's so special, talk about some of the stewardship activities we had planned, and then what are we going to do in 2023, 2024. So the Gary Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team, which is called GERT, was formed in 1999 to coordinate efforts to protect and restore, Gary Oak ecosystem, GOEs. And there are two things that a lot of things that came out of it, but two important things was the preparation of recovery strategies. So these were things that were done once a species was listed with the Federal Species at Risk Act. So they had a big hand in writing those up. And then also to identify these priority sites. So we've already gone over this, but just, Gary Oak ecosystems, what I love is the GOEs, they're the rarest ecosystem type in Canada, really. They're globally critically imperiled. There's a lot of different plant assemblages that, if you go to NatureServe that are, classified as globally critically imperiled. Has the highest plant diversity in BC. This is my botany bias. Most species at risk in Canada, and very little remaining. They figure this one around as 5%. It's probably a lot less than that. And then it's made up, it's not just about Gary Oak trees, but it's about the assemblage of plants and animals that go along with the that are associated with these Gary Oak trees. So sometimes there might not even be a Gary Oak in there, and one of them is a vernal seep, which is what Harewood Plains is, or a lot of it. So this is, you've probably seen this before, but this is the distribution of GOEs in Canada. Most of it's on the island. There's a small population on the mainland. And it gives the impression that it's one continuous swath, but it's actually a lot patchier than that. And then what GERT did in beginning of the 1990s is it started to look at identifying, the best examples of what remained of GOE. So what they did was they mined the provincial databases. They spoke to experts, people who had been to these places, and they use a lot of aerial photography to delineate the boundaries of these sites. And the important thing that's been told me many times is that they did it without any regard to land ownership. So they just looked at it and they said, okay, it doesn't matter if there's a house in the middle of it, that's still part of this site that we've identified based on, the aerial photos like Staffan did, and then also, knowledge of what's there. And then over time, they ID'd 220 sites, and Harewood Plains was one of the first that they mapped. And then this is what the GERT website says about Harewood Plains. It said, you can read it, but the important part is experts currently rank Harewood Plains as the highest priority Gary Oak ecosystem site on Vancouver Island for conservation. So there you go. And that's from a few years ago. So this is what the 220 sites look like. You can see quite patchy. Some of them you probably recognize, some small, some big. And then they went through a process of slimming that list down, of going through them and picking out, the better ones. And then in, I guess, 2020, the province decided that they were going to, with money from the feds, was going to look at a way of honing down that list to identify a number of sites for immediate stewardship support. And so one of these sites, there's only 5 of them, was Harewood Plains. And they did that based on the conservation value, which is very high, the imminent threats, the ownership structure, and that I'm not super clear on what they mean by that. I think it had to do with opportunity, requiring some kind of external input to get things going. Harewood Plains is a bunch of different landowners, and so it's complex. It's not going to happen on its own, I guess. And then local conservation stewardship groups. So there's a lot around Harewood Plains. So there's people you can plug into, and then opportunities for First Nations engagement. So here are the 5 sites. So you can see Harewood Plains, but there's also on Galliano, that thin one on the island, that's Mount Soodle, Maple Mountain, Skirt Mountain, which is in Langford, and that was chosen because it was being basically eaten, like just they were hoping to save something perhaps. And then Highlands, which is, you know, a neighborhood. So here's the site, and that purple line is the site. So that you can see doesn't really follow what you see on the ground. And that's why what Staffan said interested me, because that obviously has to be ground truth at some point. But that is the site as it's drawn in the database. And we'll probably get more into this, but it's a complex site, you know, multiple landowners. I won't talk too much about that. And it has very high conservation values. So 15 species at risk have been reported for the site. 8 of those are federally listed. So that's important because if ever you want to get funding, that's one of the important criteria for getting funding from the feds. 7 of them are provincially listed. And then as well, there are all these critically imperiled ecological communities, you know, the vernal seeps, the pools, but also the Gary Oak / ocean spread, small pockets of that. And that's not really well defined. So here are the pictures of some of the plants. So these are the ones that have been, that are in the provincial database. There's 4 species. So one of them is the dense flower willow herb. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's not known from very many locations in BC. Foothill sedge. It is federally endangered. It's on the SARA list. Slim leaf onion, and there's still records for that from INAT, but this was inventoried a long time ago. And then Hossakia pinnata, and I don't know what, like, it was bugs, bird foots, trefoil or something like that. Anyhow, Hossakia pinnata, and is endangered. And as you know, it's Harewood Plains is the only site, or has the majority of the plants in Canada, and Nanaimo has most of the plants. And so this is kind of where they lie, where they were mapped by the province. So the yellow circles there are Hossakia pinnata, the I don't know what the English name is. And then on top of that, there is an additional 11 species that have been identified through iNaturalist. And if you have any questions about iNaturalist, I can explain that, but it's a good resource. And one of the things that popped up on iNaturalist was Hossakia gracilis. So that's a similar species that's found on Trial Island and a couple of places in, you know, in this CRD. But it's not the same species, despite it was like a look. So it was mis-ID'd, I guess what I'm saying, at Harewood Plains. And I can tell you how to identify them. It had the similar colors, but there's an important characteristic that's different. And then the other one that has been reported is Muhlenberg Centauri. That is found in 2 or 3 places in the province. Howell's violet, and this is a liverwort, blue listed, a butterfly, and a frog, and then there's more, but I just want to show it wasn't all plants. And this is where they, you know, the INAT is just dots, it's just points. So there's no information on, you know, extent of occurrence really. And then Staffan already talked about this, but, you know, the threats are recreational impacts, similar picture that Staffan showed. Pretty much any meadow that you zoom in on has these sort of track marks. And it kind of looks like that. You can see that they've attempted to stop vehicles. These are small rocks, but other places really large rocks. It doesn't seem to work. You know, the damage lasts a long time. And it changes the water flow as well. And, you know, this is the one Staffan showed. This is from January. It's when it had just happened. And it was just bulbs lying everywhere. And then this is the hydro cut, the road building. So this is kind of how I got into it, was through this sign project. And so in 2021, the feeling was that there was money to put up, to create signs and to use, I guess, moral suasion language to encourage people not to do the things that we, you know, saw in the last slides. And I worked with one of Diana DeMarshy at Flinrod, and came up with these locations for the signs. So there's a lot more signs than that. No ATVs are those red triangles, and then stay on trails, and keep dogs on leash at the beginning at the trailheads. So, and there were a lot of signs printed, and a lot of them didn't get posted. So I was brought back to look at maybe trying to figure out how to fix those signs or find out what the issue might have been and rectify it. But well, I'll just show you these are the signs. So this is a sign that there's signs all over Harewood Plains, but you can see when you have a sign like this that's not maintained, it gives a feeling of not being serious, I guess, or it's not being monitored. There's no people coming to check, and these are some of the signs. So one of the issues turned out to be, so you have the stay on trail on the left, and then on the right there's like no ATVs, no dirt bikes, and then there was this no mountain bikes. And it turns out that certainly on the Mosaic lands, they have an agreement with the biking groups to allow usage of their land. So they want to have those all struck from the sign. So we're going to do that. And then this Harewood Mosaic put up these signs on their part of the property. And again, you can see no bikes as well. This is ones that they printed, and then threats of $50,000 fines. So the other threat is invasive shrubs, pretty much everywhere. It's a problem, mainly broom, but also blackberry, ivy, and Daphne. And I guess right now, the idea is that there's not much point removing broom from some of the areas if the long-term maintenance of those sites is not somehow guaranteed, or if they may be turned into a housing development. So through this process of looking at the signs, we ended up connecting with NALT and did some poking around, and NALT discovered this, I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, this plan to build a housing project. So that completely changed the kind of the direction that this was going in terms of what we thought would be the best use of monies going forward. So one of the things we decided, we talked to people in the province, like with the Conservation Data Center, is to conduct surveys. So to figure out if you're going to, because a lot of the land is on Mosaic property, and it also extends into the private property, if you want to save those valuable ecological components, the plants and the seeps, you have to know where they are. And that hasn't been well defined. And also the inventories that were done, a lot of them were done in the early mid zeros, like 2003, 2006. So they need to be updated as well. So how many, what's the population of the Hosakia pinnata, how's it doing? And then also to look at these INAT observations that are coming in and confirm them. I mean, a lot of them you can confirm through the vetting process in INAT and also just looking at the pictures, but some of them it's not so obvious. So you need to go around and confirm those, map the extent of the wet meadows, where are they? And if everybody wanted to save it, let's say buy land and protect it, you'd want to know what land you want to purchase or what land you want to save. And then also look at other ecological communities. I mean, you heard a lot about vernal seeps, but there are other things there that haven't been looked at least not that I know. Oh, sorry. And then also in 2023, 2024, we're going to look at doing some stewardship work with land managers. So here we're talking the city of Nanaimo, working with volunteers to get broom removal started in some areas and then complete the signage, because there's all these signs that have been printed, and where should they be posted now, especially given the changing landscape. And then this is right now the proposed area for the survey. So it's that yellow area, and you can see it's mainly on the private managed forest lands, which is Mosaic, and then also Lotus Pinnatus Park. We don't have access to the private property because we haven't been able to get in touch with the owner, and just going in there would be trespassing. So that's the main thing we'd like to do in the coming year. And we have to do it right away, like starting next week. And so in terms of further steps, it would be good to expand the survey area. So looking for help from NALT to people. How do we expand that to include the private property, or we just forget about it? Expand beyond plants and ecological communities. So I'm very plant focused. A lot of the people who are working with me are plant focused. It'd be good to have other people documenting what's on site. And there seems to be an abundance of plants, but not the other bugs and birds. And then maybe holding a bio blitz at some point. So I hope I didn't speed through that too quickly. But if you have any questions, fire away, or you want me to go back a bit?
Can I talk and they'll hear me?
Yeah,
How about if there's questions for Wylie here in the room, I'll repeat them to him. How about
okay.
that? So, any questions?
Yeah, open up the chat there.
There are several questions on chat, Julia.
Oh, are there? Okay. I can't. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Ooh.
Okay. Okay, I hope I'm starting in the right place here. There's a question, are land developers required to provide an environmental impact study? In BC, are wetlands, et cetera, protected?
That's a great question, and I didn't mention it because I thought it might be the next speaker's topic, but there's this working group, and I believe it's not my area of expertise, but there's the Water Sustainability Act, I think, and to look at how it applies, how it applies to vernal seeps. So, and then I think Scott or Paul's going to talk about the hydrological study impacts. So that's a concern. And then regarding motorized recreational activities, so the question is, rather than signs, has anyone contacted the user groups directly? So not the dirt bike club, but the ATV and mountain bike clubs, yes. And certainly the mountain bikes are not really the problem. I mean, it's minor compared to the ATVs. They all say none of their members would do it, but this is something that would be great to pursue further because nobody has an answer. And I think people have been struggling with this for a long time. Mosaic has signs up saying there's a $50,000 fine, but there's nobody enforcing it. And then they weren't sure where that $50,000 came from. Like nobody, there's this $50,000 fine that appears on a couple of the signs, and it's not clear where that comes from. So I think the consensus was we have to use kind of a moral suasion approach with like signage that says, please don't go here, informational, etc. But that doesn't seem to, since the ATVers are not really the kind that might stop to read that stuff, or care, it has no effect. So
Team up with
nobody
the
really
gun club.
knows. Okay. What was it? What was that?
Somebody said team up with the gun club.
Yeah.
I see there's a few more questions here that are about hydrology. And Scott, probably our next speaker, will know more about those. Somebody else is asking, do we also need to map the areas that supply water to the wet areas, i.e.
Mhm.
don't the vernal seeps depend on water coming from forested areas uphill?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
I think Scott will talk about that.
Yeah, and Scott can talk to that a bit more. Are there any other questions in the room before we move on? Somebody at the back there?
Quick question, it's more an experience I had regarding mapping between the provinces and city of Nanaimo. Specifically tree mapping, I'm not sure if I speak to that right now.
So you're wanting to offer an experience you've had with mapping of trees with the province and with the city of Nanaimo?
Correct.
Yeah. And so what was your experience?
My experience was a property near my home, 5-acre property and 3-acre property were logged starting February 28th and March 1. It's considered nesting and not to long after nesting season started. I contacted the city of Nanaimo and I found out that they can request from developers a tree mapping survey to include all birds, all nesting species. They can strongly request it, but the city of Nanaimo does not have the power to make the developers have that survey done.
Right. So I don't know. I doubt that the people on Zoom could hear that, but this
No.
person is saying that her experience with people logging on private property in the season when it's nesting and they're not supposed to be logging. The city of Nanaimo was contacted and they had no power to enforce that. So that's an example of where the province and the city have different powers, and those are the kinds of things we have to be aware of as we go forward. How about one more question?
I
And then
agree,
think
yeah.
we need to move on. I saw a hand back there.
I was just gonna say that, big developments like that, the city does have a policy on doing environmental impact assessments. So they have things like, development permits. So this area is designated, the Harewood Plains is on the city's map. So the area has ecological, got a development permit area. Two is what's included, I think, which is for ecological areas. So anytime any development needs to be proposed, be done, you have to do a full environmental impact assessment. So, and then the requirements are that you have to see how does that developer protect those ecological features and functions of that parcel within the development. So they have the city has exercised that policy in the past where they've actually denied development. And the things like such as private land, people do have the right, large private land, people do have the right to lodge their property. For housing development, they have to go through a process which is a tree management plan or tree management plan. So there's a percentage of the trees in that development that have to be maintained. If
Yeah.
they're accidentally lost, then they have to.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll just try and summarize that briefly for the people on Zoom. This person is saying that with this proposal to develop the site, the developer has to go through a process with the city and they've got development permit areas and they require various kinds of environmental assessments. Possibly Paul will talk more about that. I'm aware that time is an issue here, folks. So if you've got more questions, please save them for later and we'll move on to having Scott speak. Scott, who is the tech expert. You can get yourself set up here.
You weren't holding your mouth right.
Okay. Sorry for the technical confusion there. I don't know what's going on, but my name is Scott Black, and I'm going to tell you a bit about vernal pools and what they are and why they're found in Nanaimo and pretty much nowhere else around. So hopefully I can go to the next slide now. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to close this. How do can I close this thing too?
No, don't
No.
do that.
I can't hide it?
You don't see that on Zoom.
Okay, all right.
Presentation on Zoom and everybody else.
Okay, good.
ignores it.
Okay, good. I'm just trying to see my own slide. So what is a vernal pool? Well, it has specific physical attributes, first of all. So it's an ephemeral wetland, so it's seasonally inundated with water. It's in a Mediterranean climate like we are here, which means it's warm enough to support a certain suite of plants and soil processes. And it also has a certain geomorphic setting and certain soils. So it's going to be, it's going to have some sort of hard pan. So it's either going to have clay, compacted layer, cemented layer, or bedrock. So in the case of Harewood Plains, we've got a cemented conglomerate bedrock, which is our setting, and then we've got certain soils. So we'll talk a bit more about that. Where are vernal pools found? So California has the most vernal pools around. There's some in Chile, there's some in Australia, but California is definitely the biodiversity hotbed for vernal pools. The whole Great Basin in California, used to have a lot. They still have some though. So a 20-meter plot around here will have maybe 20 species. In California, we'll have 200. And BC, right here in our backyard, is the most northern range of vernal pools around. This is it. This is the edge of it right here. How many are left? Well, in BC, it's very strange. Like if you look it up, there's no class. The BC Wetland Guide doesn't even mention vernal pools. There's no real classification for them in BC because there's only a few of them. There's a few in the Gulf Islands. There's a big one in the Nanaimo. And there used to be some in Victoria, but they're pretty much all gone. So it's even fewer than the Garry Oak ecosystems. If there's 1% left of the Garry Oak ecosystems, there's like 0.1% of vernal pools left, because they're just a subset of those Garry Oak ecosystems. And so those wetland functions from that vernal pools provide are often overlooked, because often you'll go there in the summertime and you won't even know it's a vernal pool, right? You'll just see a bunch of plants you don't even realize. There we go. So here's a little diagram showing kind of like a typical vernal pool setup on the landscape. This kind of shows you where these plant communities might be. So I'm using Harewood Plains as an example. So in the vernal pools, can you see my mouse on Zoom? Can you see my mouse on Zoom?
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So in the vernal pools, you've got your shallow soils, you've got seasonal inundation, intermittent hydro period, and this is where you've got your rare plants that are adapted to these brief spring interludes. So you've got your Hoxsackia, you've got Isoedes, you've got Juncus, you've got the monkey flower, you've got the New Mexican Fontanalis moss, and a bunch of mosses. And then you've got the mounds. So this is where you've got the really interesting lichen outcrops that are kind of interspersed, which is what makes these ecosystems so diverse. You've got really wet right next to really dry, because the rock just kind of goes up and down. And then you've also got larger pools. So just above, or in some areas of Harewood Plains, but just above, you've got more swampy areas. So, and on the edges of those, you've got more like deeper pooling. And so you've got a whole other suite of indicators, sedges, Eliocharis, hardhacks by Rheta douglasii that you'll find in those areas. And those areas tend to get more forested because there's more water, it holds onto water longer. And so the trees, willows, and shrubs can get established. But what keeps these vernal pools more open is that they drought. In the summertime, it's just completely dry and the trees just can't make it. So here's a little cross section of a typical soil profile. Very thin. You've got a lot of organic accumulation. It's a district Brunazol soil, if anyone knows soils here. But basically you've just got, 15 centimeters approximately of soil over hardpan. And this is kind of what it looks like. Vernal pool just means a spring puddle in general. So this would be a typical example of something you could find on Harewood Plains that you would know, well, this is a vernal pool. You can see it's a mud puddle, or now it's dried up. And this was taken just the other day. They're already drying up because it has been hot. But we had, a couple of weeks ago, we had a massive rain. Everything was full of water. So just in the course of 2 weeks can go from overflowing to dry. And so this was a couple of weeks ago after a large rain event. You can see there's all these seeps all over the place. The place is just covered in water. You can see how these very complex interconnected pools are cascading down the slope, sheet flow. Sometimes it's a sheet flow that spreads out through the meadows, and sometimes it goes from one pocket to another pocket in the bedrock and it finds its way down. And then over time it dries out and all the wildflowers come up and they take care of all the organic matter that builds up in these thin soils, actually holds on to moisture for quite a while. So they're quite productive. And here's a look at the distribution of vernal pools in Western North America. I don't know if you can see, but you can see California is this large swath here into Oregon and just up into Washington. But most of the Great Basin, the northern part of California, has a lot of vernal pools. There's a little bit in bottom of Puget Sound, but then there's this one little dot, and that's Nanaimo, right? And there's just a few. There's one on Galliano. There's a few around Nanaimo, and you could, if you were gonna, there's a couple in these coastal bluffs. You might consider them vernal pool type ecosystems. They're very small though, in Victoria as well. So yeah, you can see we're right on the edge of this kind of habitat. That's why it's so rare. They also have, so we talked about some physical attributes. Now they also have a lot of biological attributes. Why are they so biologically unique? Well, like I mentioned, because they do dry out, so they're very productive for a short period of time. There's a certain suite of plants that can take advantage of that. And because they dry out in the summertime, the trees, except for maybe the Gary oaks, if they can get their roots down in the cracks in the rocks, the Gary oaks will be on the edge and the Douglas fir will be out even further. So they have less competition. And so that's why you get a lot of plants that will be adapted specifically for these kinds of habitats. Yes, there's different types. So a lot of the ones in California are on clay, but similar kind of thing. There's a hard pan. There's a barrier that holds the water from just seeping into the soil. These ones are in around Nanaimo or rock, but they have various functions. One is water storage, so it really slows down the water. So an important function of Harewood Plains for the Nanaimo estuary is that when large rain events hit the ridge, like the abyss, and all that water comes down, it spreads out in sheet flow over these mossy meadows, and it just really slows down. And if you were to get rid of those and channelize it, it would just go right into the estuary, and you wouldn't get all that filtering, and you wouldn't get all those nutrients being stored, and that would be a big change. So, and it's a refugia for a lot of species during drought. Just a couple. So here's a picture of a California vernal pool. This is in Sacramento. You can see there are lots of wildflowers. You got your oaks as well. Beautiful meadows. These are like some of the plants down there are just stunning. They're just amazing. It just blows my mind how neat it is. So many species down there. If you catch them in flower, it's just fantastic. And this is Harewood Plains. So same kind of idea. You've got some oaks. Here's a little oak over here. And then you've got the Douglas fir like in a little patch of deeper soil there, but you've got this kind of undulating bedrock and patches of soil and the ponding of vernal pools. So here's another one in California. Beautiful big wildflower meadow. And here's one at Harewood Plains. Same kind of idea. You can see it's just got this slight depression, collects water for a little bit longer, but thin soils and amazing diversity. How do you know if you're standing in a vernal pool? Well, if you see this moss, this is New Mexican Fontanalis. It's quite a big leafy moss, quite distinctive. If you see it, you know you're standing in what was a seep. So this is a good indicator of aquatic habitats and vernal pools and seepage areas. Another indicator, which is very common on Harewood Plains, you'll see in amongst the camas and some of the more longer lasting wet areas, you'll see Alicomium palestra, the glow moss. It's quite distinctive as well. Beautiful kind of golden glowing moss. You'll see it at the base of all the wildflowers. Another good indicator. And then in some of the deeper areas in Harewood Plains, you'll see Eliochorus and other sedges and carex species, and willows and hardhack. So many species are restricted to vernal pools. It's the only place they grow. And like I said, the summer drought helps maintain that community. And what's interesting is that some plants are common to regional vernal pools. So some plants are only found in Washington, they're only found in Oregon, and they're only found in California. So there's a juncus, an example would be Juncus hemianditis. So that's a rare plant that's found in Harewood Plains. And it's found in one spot in Harewood Plains, it's found in one spot in Washington, and it's found in a few spots in California. That's it. And interestingly, that species likes a bit of disturbance. So it actually grows on the sides of the ATV trails and the gravelly bits.
Don't tell them.
Well, so the thing is it likes just a little bit of disturbance. It doesn't like too much, because if there's too much disturbance, then all the gravel just washes away during a rain event and it doesn't have anywhere to grow. So it took me 3 years to find a season where it was actually growing, where I could find it. Because otherwise it's impossible to find in the camas meadow, because it's only like 2 centimeters tall. You can't see it.
Are they related to cats? You said they're very fussy.
Yeah, so Wylie was talking a bit about rare plants. So this is just a little example of some of the plants. I won't spend much time on that. And this is another map. So this is the boundary that I've been working with. I'm doing a little bit of mapping in that area right now. But you can see that a lot of the Harewood Plains is mapped as rare plant habitat. And for funny enough, like this whole top area is the private land that is proposed for development. So that's where most of the rare plants are too, fortunately. But there was some talk about hydrology. So you can see up on the hill here, like the Abyss Ridge is just up here, on all this water flows down the slope and it collects in all these pools. There's another ridge here, but all this water goes down and it just slowly works its way down to the highway. So there's a couple swampy wetlands just south of the hydro line. That's this corridor here, and then it works its way. It's very complex drainage. It goes all the way through Harewood Plains. So the hydrology is not fully mapped at the moment, but it's very complex, and you can't see it unless you go there in the spring. So yeah, here's the Oxacia, the allium, there's the juncus that I was talking about. But like Wylie was said, there's also some animals there. And one is the western bumblebee, which is blue listed. It's actually, there's a recent federal recovery strategy for the western bumblebee. You think, well, how could the western bumblebee be under threat? But it is apparently, because there's just no more native meadows for it to actually do its thing in. So that's one important function for wildlife. Pollinators, of course, Harewood Plains, the plants are amazing, but the pollinators that depend on that flower bloom are also very important. And then the Pacific tree frog it loves these kind of ephemeral wetlands because it's just enough time, it has a few weeks, can lay its eggs, get out there, and it doesn't have to worry about fish coming in and eating its young or anything. So it can, and this one is just gorgeous. It looks just like the rock, like the camouflage is amazing. And then that brings up the question, well, vernal pools are wetlands, and wetlands are defined as streams under the Water Sustainability Act. So what is the legal protection? And there isn't a lot of precedent as far as vernal pools, but vernal pools are wetlands. If you ask anyone, they'll tell you they are. And so if we take the time to actually map them or just document them, we can establish them as wetlands, and there can be some sort of protection. And there's also the Federal Species at Risk Act. So we have a lot of some of the rare plants that live there are federally listed. So that's another legal protection that I'm sure we'll talk about later. But otherwise, just go out and do some donuts, and maybe the Water Sustainability Act can't prevent that from happening. So that's something that we all can help work on, and just work on the education, work on the outreach, and try and prevent simple things like this, which should be something that we can work on. Whereas developments, or maybe a little bit, that depends on environmental assessments and the whole process, right? But we can make projects that have fewer residual effects, so we can do better development. We can maintain the hydrology, we can reduce the disturbance as much as we can, at least, as long as we recognize the function that vernal pools provide. So I think in BC, to me, we just, there was a paper in 2005 that Mike Miller put out for the federal government about vernal pools and how rare they are, and there was 100 sites in BC at that point, and I'm sure it's at least there's less than half of that left now, since 2005. So but we don't know, because no one's tracking them and no one's mapped them, or even I haven't seen any discussion about them in the literature since 2005. So so it's very interesting, and I think it's something that should be worked on. And that's it. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about wetlands or. Yes.
Do the large pools also dry up?
Yeah. Yes.
Buttercup would not be an example of a larger pool.
Yeah, but do the large pools also dry up? So there is some swamps in the Harewood Plains area that would be considered swamps, so they're shrub swamps. And yes, they also will dry out. They'll take a lot longer though. So they'll go well into the summer. Whereas the vernal pools, the shallow ones, that might just take a few weeks for them to dry up. But if we get another rain event, they can fill right up again very, very quickly. So does that answer your question? Yeah, and so also those large ones also feed into the small ones, because if they're connected. So when if the large ones overflow a bit, they'll spill over. Yes.
The water that's coming in the end down past the highway, is that being caught for drinking water, like in the Colliery Dam or somewhere that it could be used for drinking water supply and protected?
The water from Harewood Plains, is it caught and used for drinking?
Yeah.
As far as I know, the water that drains off Harewood Plains kind of all mostly goes to the ditch along the highway there and then flows under and down into the estuary. Either Chase River. I think it mostly goes to Chase
So,
River.
okay, thanks.
So it does go directly into fish habitat. So it is important, like the filtering that all those vernal pools do is quite important. Yeah, but I don't think it's drinking water. No.
No.
Any other
There are a
questions?
couple of comments
Oh.
in the chat. They're not actually questions. That's the latest. One about input when Homeworks naturalist suggested BC Nature that Nature Canada has money.
Oh, yes.
Read that, yeah.
So time to swiftly purchase, yes. Input from Comox Naturalist suggested that BC Nature and Nature Canada has money. Yes, act quickly. That's true. Yes, and also BC Parks has also there's a pot of money there as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interest from provincial and federal and NGOs in trying to purchase this land. It is for sale. If anyone has 12.75 million, they want to donate. The developer bought it for 5 million and is trying to flip it for 12.
Another comment at the bottom about make a petition for protest.
Yes, I have seen a letter campaign online, so I would encourage you to write the city. That would be something that you could all do. Let them know that you won't vote for a certain councillor unless they do something about this, and then they might feel like maybe they should do what they can. Was there? Yeah, go ahead.
So we know that there's lots of species at risk there. We don't have a provincial species at risk act, so in the works as a like schooling.
Yeah.
But has the federal minister of environment or kind of notified of these developments, for example, or what's going on there at all?
Not that I know of. So has the federal Species at Risk Act have the people responsible for that been notified about Harewood Plains? From my knowledge, the Federal Species at Risk Act only applies to federal land, or where a federal permit is applied upon. So if you're doing a federal EA, environmental assessment, and you require a Fisheries Act approval or something like that, then they can say, well, you've got a SARA listed species, you have to mitigate, or you have to have a plan. But because this is private land, that's not necessarily the case. And like you said, there's no provincial Species at Risk Act. They worked on it a little bit and then they gave up, I think, from lobbyists lobbying, business industry. So the main thing is if there's a WSA permit, the province can delay that WSA permit, saying that they would like the developer to deal with any species at risk, and before they get that permit. So that's one way that the province could do it, even though there isn't any Species at Risk Act per se.
I'm gonna step in here, time's ticking on. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah. That's lucky that worked so quickly, because I've been up since 4 a.m. and I rarely see the second 9 o'clock in a day. So I'm on borrowed time. I just want to start by thanking Nature Nanaimo for providing this forum and bringing folks out tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on the territory of the Nanaimo people, and Harewood Plains is definitely in their territory. And I'm Paul Chapman. I'm with the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust, NALT, founded in 1995. Our mission is to support, protect, and promote protected natural values of land and water in our area. We have 400 some odd members and 600 volunteers, and we always welcome more members. That's not poaching. You can be members of both organizations. So no, we're a friendly group here. I just want to, looking at this screen, you've seen a lot of the pictures of the different flowers that exist, but I want to draw your attention to these two maps in the upper left here. This one here, in the sort of pink area there, that's showing the Gary Oak Meadows of the Harewood Plains. And then this one near the top, that's the purple is showing the coastal Douglas fir forest. So those two things are attached, right? Gary Oak Meadow is a subsystem of a coastal Douglas fir forest. And that's there, and they're incredibly rare. And these maps were developed as part of NALT's priority places mapping project, and has been presented to the city as a priority conservation area. Yeah, and so I'll keep referring back to those maps, the CDF, the coastal Douglas fir, and the Gary Oak, as we go through some different slides. This one shows the two things. You have the Lotus Pinatus parks, and then over to the right of the screen, you have a covenanted area. So there's part of a density transfer that happened. So part of this property used to exist to the north of the parkway, and there was a density transfer offered. So they built these, these houses in here in a much, denser pattern than they would have been allowed. And the trade-off for the citizens of Nanaimo were the Lotus Pinatus parks, these two parks, and as well as this covenanted area. The parks are public, the covenant is private land. There's a mechanism in place where that could become public land as part of a park dedication, another density transfer, so count that, 2 density transfers on that one piece of land, and or as a eco gift. So right now that covenant area is private land. It may well become public land if the development permit process, it works through its full system. So I should mention, I'm going to concentrate on the one property that's within the city of Nanaimo that is currently in the subdivision approvals process. That's what I'm going to look at today. That's climate, other than climate change, the biggest challenge to biodiversity is going to be building things on this land. There's the development concept. I think Wylie had a better photo of it, but I can, sort of walk you through it here. If you can see my cursor, this is Lotus Pinatus Way, right? So if you park under the, by the underpass of the parkway and walk in that road, you end up here in Lotus Pinatus Way. If you look on this map, on this conceptual image, now this is a conceptual image. We haven't seen what the drawings in the subdivision approval process are like, but so this is the best we have to go from. We don't know what those final drawings are like. But if I walk in here, there's a road, and here's some housing, and here's some other housing, and the road goes along, and there's more multifamily units here, single family units here, and you can see they go right up to the border of the park, right? And then they, between the two parks, they go right down to the border of the Parkway development permit area. So there's a setback that has to be or should be observed along the parkway. So they go right down to the parkway setback. And then this park is, it's surrounded by housing here, a road at the top of the slope, more housing going in here, and roads that go in with those housing. So there's a whole road network. This is a multi-unit string here, and then back into single family here, right up to the covenant edge. There are quite a few development permits in place. We heard someone speak about that earlier, about the different development permit approvals that have to go through. Sensitive area development approval, steep slope, unstable slope, wildfire. So there's all these different things that the city requires for a developer to address. But the rigors of those things, I would say, if you've ever seen a Gary Oak Meadow developed, you've seen an environmentally sensitive area developed under the approval process that exists within the city. So even though those things are in place, developments do happen on them. Yeah, and then also, if you think about what we have here is we're protecting a area of Gary Oak Meadow and another area of Gary Oak Meadow and another area of Gary Oak Meadow, but we're disregarding the coastal Douglas fir that exists upslope of those Gary Oak Meadows. So it's like we've said, this is important here. We need to protect this thing, but we haven't thought about what conditions go to contribute to make that thing so special, right? I've got my professional notes I wrote down for today's meeting. I just wanted to, I wanted to say it's a fine balance and it's a delicate balance. And I'm not sure that this is in balance. So there, I'm just looking again, those parks in the Covenant area and the map, the concept of the development. Again, I've been told that this isn't the development or the subdivision that's in the approval process, but this is the best we have. This is a map that's off of the developer's website. There's a couple different images. So some time and money has gone into this. So this is some idea of the concept of the development that they intend to go forward with. And again, it's those, those roads on the upslope and the buildings on the upslope, hovering over the Gary Oak Meadows that are downslope from them. And species at risk, we've seen this map again, right? So that big yellow swath in here, that's, most of the Hosakia pinnatus. There's a couple little bits of it that exist in Lotus pinnatus Park. And there are, other areas of species at risk. But I think it's important too, and I think it was Staffan at the beginning mentioned it. It's not just what's in those big open meadows that's the rare beauty of this place, but it's also what's like in the understory of the coastal Douglas fir. Like you walk through there and you see the Calypso bulbosa, right? The fairy slipper orchid in numbers that you don't normally see around here, right? Like there's some really rare. I come up with catchphrases for things mostly because it makes it easier for me to remember. So this is an area of rare abundance, right? Those two things that don't normally exist together, rare abundance. We have it here. And this is a map of the hydrology. This is a desktop, this hasn't been ground truth, but looking at the land and the shape of the land and how water might run across it. And I think it's probably pretty accurate. So this is that western side of the property, and there's a ridge line here. And the water runs down slope, imagine that, water runs downhill. You've got to pay a lot for a map to find that out. But water runs downhill, right? And all along here, it all runs downhill. So, and then at the covenanted area, you can see it's running downhill. And like Scott said, it's, the contributions of the connections of that hydrology exists in the private managed forest land. So the conditions that come together to make those rare and abundant plant communities and those provide a space for those imperiled species. It all depends on that interconnected, depends on the upslope. We can't say, here's the plant, let's protect that area. We have to think, what provides for that plant and protect that area. So I've dumbed it down, grossly dumbed down the hydrology by putting these white arrows on here. So you can sort of get a general idea of the flow. It's from upslope to downslope, right? So whatever interventions happen upslope will affect that flow of water downslope. You can't really see that, but that's again, that development, conceptual development, right? So if you think about where the buildings and the roads are, they are interrupting that water flow. That, the hydrology of the land is being stopped by roads and stopped by foundations. And the development permit process would say, the hydrology must be being maintained, that it, can't be disturbed by development. But I don't know how you do that if you put a road in there. And I don't know how you do it if you put a number of foundations in there and more than one road. There's going to be a disruption to the hydrology. And in fact, some of those foundations exist on top of those rare plant communities. I don't know how that you protect those in this situation. And we've talked a lot about Hosakia pinnata, and again, it's Nanaimo's official floral emblem. And this is that iNaturalist, those green sites, show, the occurrences that have been recorded on iNaturalist of Hosaki pinnatus in the area. And how rare is it? Well, that's how rare it is. That little red dot on Vancouver Island. That's where the Hosaki pinnatus exists. If I stretch this map out across all of Canada, there wouldn't be another red dot. If I drag it down the coast, it starts to show up because that's where those vernal seeps exist, or the vernal pools exist that Scott talked about. But here, it's here, and it's nowhere else. So here again, there's the development concept overlaid over the map. There are those occurrences of Hosaki pinnatus. So this cluster here, this dense cluster here, exists under where in this drawing, there are a number of houses. So that's roads, that's driveways, that's foundations, that's roofs, that's yards, right? I don't see how Hosaki pinnatus can continue to exist there. And over here, this is what I think probably what most people think of when they think of the Harewood Plains, that place where we've seen all that disruption from those ATVs, right? Well, this is in that covenanted area. But when you put the hydrology overlay on that, you can see that the roads and the construction of houses will disrupt that hydrology too. And again, it's a fine balance and it's a delicate balance. And will these rare plants continue to exist if we do this development? I think it's a question we don't want to ask. I don't think we want to find out if they do or don't. I think we want to find out. I think we want to protect what we have, what we know we have, and that rare abundance that happens nowhere else except for here. So bear with me now. This is my artistic license as we roll through it, but I'm going to walk you along Lotus Pinnatus Way, the road that they're going to build. So here we are. This is as you're entering the property and through that CDF forest. Here's Lotus Pinnatus Way. This will be a road. I won't let it run to the end, but if I did, you'd come across some flagging tape that's already gone up in this area. Again, this is that area where the buildings exist on either side of the road. So to the right of the screen, you have multifamily housing, and to the left, all the way down slope till you hit the parkway setback, you have housing. And this is a Gary Oak Meadow. This is that unstable slope area. So just downslope from that is where the road will ride. And it's the road at the top of the ridge, immediately upslope of that larger Lotus Pinnatus part. This is the same area, right? So this is road. This is what we're looking at. This is going to be road, and below that road will be houses. And underfoot, what we have is some of that rare abundance, right? We have Clipsa bulbosa, right? We have, it's an amazing, and there's more. I was just wandering through one day and trying to figure out how my phone works. But, and then as we go out of the CDF, we get into the open meadows and we run into, checkered lily, chocolate lily. So this is what is at stake here. There's this abundance of this rare abundance. And, we heard of $12.9 million. That's the asking price right now for this piece of property. Now that's aspirational, right? He's bought it for 5.7, I think, in 2020. He's asking 12.9. That's maybe what he figures the value would be if that subdivision approval goes through. He's done some work, he flips it for 12.9. I don't think that's the cost. You determine these things by appraisal. You don't just throw millions of dollars at a thing. You figure out what the actual cost of it is and then make your offer based on that, like you would if you were buying a house, right? Same deal. You don't say, oh, somebody's asking 5 million, here you go. You find out what the house is actually worth. It's the same deal when we're looking at conservation lands. We get an appraisal done. We base an offer off of that appraisal. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be more expensive than anything we've ever done. But I'd say that the cost of losing it is going to be greater still. And I would say that it's not going to be nearly as expensive as, say, a waterfront walkway would be, right? So these aren't numbers that we don't consider as a community, that the city hasn't thought about. You know, they've thought about $15 to $30 million for a waterfront walkway from the BC Ferries terminal to the beach at Departure Bay. Well, this looks like a pretty good deal in comparison to that in my eyes. So I think, you know, what we need to do, NALT is having conversations with the folks we need to have conversations with. I can't really get into details of that because they have their own process about how they like to do things. But we're talking with groups that have big money that do these sorts of things on this scale. So we're having those conversations. We're trying to bring them on board about, and most of them know what the Harewood Plains is. They know how rare and wonderful it is. So we're having those conversations. I think it'd be, there's some pamphlets here. I've only printed a few off because they're brand new, and mayor.council@nanaimo.ca. That's the email to contact mayor and council. Tell them how important this place is to you. Tell your MLA, tell your MP, this place is so important. This is a unique place, and once it's gone, it's not coming back. You know, this is, the city spent many years trying to grow Hosakia Panatis at their works yard, and we're unable to do it. You know, the idea was they wanted to spread it. They wanted it to be more places. They couldn't do it. It's not, you know, it's not something that happens easily. If it happened easily, it'd be everywhere. We'd be trying to figure out how to keep it out of our gardens. But that's not the case. It's a, you know, incredibly rare, and we shouldn't consider risking that. Yeah, that's the presentation. It's 9 o'clock, the other 9 o'clock. Yeah, thank you. And I'd be happy to repeat any questions and answer them. Derek.
Well, I had the good fortune of having the Harewood Plains as my playground growing up. Obviously, that was a long time ago. Most of the Harewood Plains is behind Chase River. I grew up at Starks Crossing, which is right across Chase River School. So I remember the rare abundance. We as kids used to play on them, what we call the bluffs. Flowers were everywhere, which didn't along. We didn't really vandalize the area because we didn't have motorbikes or camped out there. There was no Cinnabar Valley. It was just a beautiful, beautiful area. The worst we did was go in and pop some fir trees, like cones for $5 a sack for the forest.
So for you guys on the Zoom lesson, Derek Cowling is admitting to some vandalism he did when he was a young kid.
Responsible for my actions. I'd like to clarify some things. I think one of the things that received a good portion of the Harewood Plains so far is the urban containment boundary that the city sort of stuck with. I know Mosaic would love to have that boundary go out and be able to open up that area to develop. The development you're talking about is within the urban. So beyond the power line, then it's the regional.
Yeah, so Derek's asking about the urban containment boundary and the role that's had in protecting the plains. And he's pointed out that if you've been on the Harewood Plains, where the power lines run, that's essentially to the north of that is within the city, and to the south of that for a ways is in the regional district. And to the south of that, the power lines, and to the south of that is private managed forestry lands, Mosaic lands. The property to the north that is under the subdivision approval process is within the city containment boundary. So it's the promise there is that services will be provided in the development of that land. At this point, it looks like the cost of bringing those services there is really prohibitive, which, you know, makes me think that this subdivision approval process is really about just jacking up the price of the land, not really about subdivision. I mean, I'm hopeful that way, because the cost of, you know, blasting to bring in sewer and water and, you know, and power and whatever other services are going to cost a lot of money to develop there. So Yeah, the part I'm looking at is within the city, growth. And the area to the south of the power lines is in the regional district. It's a different, different set of regulations for developing that. And bringing it out of private managed forestry into development. And Mosaic would not say that that's what they're interested in. Whether or not they look at that and try and figure out what the highest value of the land is, that'd be something that they would do internally. But I would say that the most imperiled piece right now is that piece within the city. That's 103 Lotus Panatus Way. It's where surrounds those two parks. And that's the most imperiled piece at this point in time. There's a question back there. The question is Wylie still on the Zoom?
I am.
I think to the left of that area, there's a lot of aerials and the butterflies in the air. That area, I don't know why I was aware of that area.
Yeah, it's a statement about there being Gary Oak to the left or to the west of the covenant area. So I'm just going to go. So there's the covenant area is on the easternmost point of the land there, and for sure there's some like those sort of thin bands of Douglas fir that Scott showed to the west of that, but it isn't until you start getting up by Lotus Panatus Park that there's a denser forest. To the immediate west of the conservation area is definitely mostly meadows with some trees between them, and for sure all of it is depending on either providing or depending on those vernal seeps. Yes, the housing will be in that. From the conceptual drawing we've seen, a lot of the housing will sit right on top of those meadows between the parks and the covenanted area. Another question.
Area, I'm sort of confused with the covenant area. Now, you access that from the human way?
You could if you were intent on trespass, because it's private, right? So, but yes, that's nearest McEwen Way.
And just covenant means.
Sorry, and the question was where is the access to the covenant area, and the closest road is McEwen Way. And I've been pointed out that I haven't really explained a covenant. And a covenant is a legal agreement registered on the title of land. And in this case, it's a no build, no disturbance covenant. So no matter who owns that land, that covenant rides with it. But there's a provision in the covenant for it to become park or part of an eco gift. So it's kind of a unique covenant that way. It could change into park. And I'm not entirely clear if the covenant would then still travel with the land as park. There's some language in it that suggests it does, but it would probably have to be pointed out in the beginning of the process to make sure it did. There's another question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you think there's more value in having individual letters, or if having groups like the Council of Canadians or the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub, or our church writing a letter.
I think that at this point in time, the question was, thank you. The question was, is there more value in having groups write letters or individuals write letters? And I think at this point in time, I mean, there's no form letter created for this. I think at this point in time, the more letters they receive, city council, the better, to let them know how important this place is to you. So it's on their radar. I'm sure that they're not so mercenary as to equate letters received with votes, but for sure that's part of the calculation, right?
Somebody actually has created a letter template, and it's like a QR code that you can scan. You're going up Harewood Mines Road, you're entering, there's a little piece of paper, you can scan it, and that's
So Hunter was just pointing out that there's a there is, somebody has started a petition or a letter, form letter.
It's like, yeah, letter template. that you
Yeah,
can
a letter
send
template that's from a scannable QR code at the head of the trail at
Harewood Mines Road.
Harewood Mines Road. So that wasn't me.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Have you approached the Nature Conservancy
Uh,
to help with the purchase?
I've spoken with a number of groups around the purchase of this. That's the question is who have we spoken with? I've spoken with BC Parks Foundation. I've got information going to the Sitka Foundation. I've spoken with the Land Trust Alliance BC about it. So we're working our way through these different groups that can bring significant funds to this project. I'm waiting to hear back.
There are two, if you click on the chat. Chat
Up at the top.
on the top, so, yeah.
So the question there is, does the city of Nanaimo show interest in purchasing the area? I think that there's a bit of a chill on comments from the councillors at this point because it's in the subdivision approval process. And I imagine they're a bit wary about influencing that process one way or the other. But I would say that in the city plan document that, was part of the Reimagine Nanaimo process, when you look at, they've got sort of big fuzzy aspirational dots about where they want to acquire future parkland. There's a big fuzzy aspirational dot on this property. So it's stated in their city plan that they're interested in expanding their parks here. And, they've gone through the effort of securing the 2 pockets of Lotus Pinatus Park, as well as the covenanted area. So I'd say that there is interest. They're just not stating it right now.
There's a previous question to that one.
And the previous question is, can parts of the Reimagine Nanaimo strategy be leveraged to protect the plains? Yes. Like I said, they have indicated that that is a place that they want to expand their parks, right? So, I mean, that it's not outside of their policy, outside of their direction to expand the parks there. I think they'll have to be convinced of the delicacy of the connections that provide that rarity, the importance of it to the community, and the importance of it to the ecology of the area. And I don't think that should be very hard to convince them of that. And then, through this subdivision approval process, that'll go out for referrals to different agencies. And it'll be informative to see what the word is coming back on that. Like if there's a referral to the Watershed Stewardship Act, WSA? Water Sustainability Act. What will the word coming back from the province on that be? So I think that there's lots of opportunities here. Now, in terms of the housing piece of that, I swear right now, if you promise to do build a rental housing, they'd let you build it in the middle of a lake. Like they seem, but I think it's this false dichotomy. We don't have to choose environment or housing, right? In fact, as we move into denser housing situations, we need more spaces where we can be outside together as well, or outside apart from each other. And so, I think it's really about increasing our density in our housing, about those, being nearer to each other and nearer to services, as well as increasing how much land that we protect in common. There's a question back there.
When I was a student, walking the Buttercup area, which is now Buttercup Marsh, it was not protected. And I was scared because I love that area. It's so beautiful and had so much wildlife that I would hear every time I went through. Have we learned anything from how that got protected, that we can move forward in some way, in the same matter, or how did that happen?
So the question is, have we learned any lessons from acquisition like we did at Butter Tubs that we could apply here? And an important piece of the Butter Tubs acquisition was it was part of the Millennium Fund that was part of the centennial celebrations, where there was suddenly like $20 million available for what became the Nature Trust of BC to buy significant areas. And Butter Tubs was its second purchase. So it, you know, I think the lesson learned is that we can free up money from bigger centers like Vancouver through organizations like BC Parks Foundation and apply that money here to protect areas. There's a question over here.
This is far fetched, maybe, but I understand that the specific license plates for the parks have been very successful in creating money for the park. And I was wondering, does, when you get a Harewood Plains, beautiful flower one, to get everybody excited about it and raise some money.
So the question was, could things like the parks license plates that have raised money for BC Parks be something we could recreate for Harewood Plains? So that money goes to BC Parks, which is a very different thing than BC Parks Foundation. I don't know that they would create license plates where the money would go into provincial coffers that they would then redirect towards. So, but it's I think promotion of the plains is going to be an important part of saving the plains for sure.
There's one more question in the chat.
I think we're going to need to end this soon. So how about one more question from the chat and one more question from the floor?
What is communication strategy this time?
What is the communication strategy at this time?
This is it.
It's a longer question if we scroll it down.
You mind scrolling down to it?
Can you read it to us or? Well, then they wouldn't be able to do everyone.
What is the communication strategy at this time as far as reaching out to the community at large to rally around protection and the benefits of that to the city? For example, ecotourism. Has that angle been explored yet? I would say that so I think the question is looking at broader things like what are the economic benefits of ecotourism and how would that apply to tours of Harewood Plains. But I think the closest we're coming to that are with things like the guided walks that are happening on the 20th, and NALT is hosting one on the 27th, where we're promoting the plains to the community. You're a select group of well-informed people, and every one of you has got to spread the word from here. But most people may have heard about the Harewood Plains, probably not, and won't know where it is or why it's so important to this community. So I think that that's the initial stages of the communication campaign, and then certainly as working with Nature Nanaimo as NALT ramps up its efforts, that communication campaign will go up further.
One more question.
Just wondering, have you presented all of this information to mayor and council?
I presented a larger presentation about all of the areas in Nanaimo that NALT would prioritize for conservation, of which Harewood Plains was a piece of it. And I was hoping that would sort of catalyze a longer discussion with the city. But the day after that meeting was an in-camera meeting the day after that. So I did that presentation on the 17th of May. On the 18th of May, the subdivision approval process was entered into. So that sort of made this a discussion that they are hesitant to have, I would say.
So I think reluctantly we need to wind this up. So thank you to Staffan, Wylie, Scott, and Paul for excellent presentations. I think we all need to think about what's next. This Saturday, Nature Nanaimo has a walk to Harewood Plains. You meet on Harewood Mines Road, just past the parkway, just after you go under the parkway. And then, as Paul just mentioned, NALT is doing a walk to Harewood Plains on on Saturday, the 27th, also 10 a.m., I believe. Nature Nanaimo would prefer you to let them know you're going to come by emailing naturenanaimo@gmail.com. And on the NALT website, you can register for the walk. So going and taking friends and showing them is one thing you can do. As has been mentioned, email mayor and council. You've learned a whole bunch of stuff tonight that whatever you're passionate about, whatever caught your attention, write to mayor and council, and it's easy. It's mayor.council@nanaimo.ca. So, and that'll get them all. And then the other thing is that as we move forward with this Harewood Plains working group, we are going to need money, because Paul mentioned we need to have an appraisal of the land. That's one of the starting things you need to do. And I've been involved in the past in writing funding grants for various things, and funders always want to know, you've got some money from your supporters, you've got some money from this foundation and this group over here, and it all comes together to make the total that you need. So NALT has set up a bank account, and if you go to their website, you can donate specifically for Harewood Plains, and that will just be the startup money, okay? So again, you get tax receipts from NALT, yes. And so thank you all for coming. And again, thank you to our speakers. See you on the trail.